First tonight, 33 years have passed since the discovery of PCBs in Waukegan Harbor that qualified that port as one of the Great Lakes' most toxic hotspots. But Waukegan Harbor still awaits its final cleanup. As we continue this year's Chicago Matters series, Growing Forward, Rich Samuels tells us how a clash between local and federal policy has left Waukegan Harbor treading water.
And look at this. That is the freshest salmon you will ever get. Isn't that beautiful? Look at that.
On a day in late May, Carl Piazza was processing his catch of the day. Nearby, a mom, a dad, and their kids were enjoying the water. In the far distance, Chicago's skyline was visible. And at Waukegan Harbor's western edge, the National Gypsum Plant was turning out its daily quota of 1 million square feet of drywall.
Where does your product get shipped to from here?
The majority of it is actually shipped in the Chicago and Milwaukee area. We have 20-some-odd plants in our company, so they service different parts of the United States.
Outside, there's a small mountain of gypsum, the raw material from which drywall is made. It comes from a quarry in Saginaw Bay on Lake Huron. Ships like the motor vessel Sam Laud and the MV Buffalo transport the raw material to Waukegan Harbor.
This is where our ships actually come in. They come into this channel right here, this slip, and they have approximately 12,000 ton of gypsum on them.
The industrial past of Waukegan Harbor lives on. But the ship approaching the harbor today is not a deep draft commercial vessel. It's the Moon Star from Portland, Maine, 43 feet from stem to stern. On board are Craig and Pam Mudge and their 2-year-old golden retriever, Hannah. Over the past 12 months, they've cruised all the Great Lakes.
We started this cruise in Solomons, Maryland last May, and we went outside and up to New York Harbor and up the Hudson, into the Erie Canal, through the Oswego extension of the Erie Canal into Lake Ontario, and then through Lakes Ontario, Erie, Huron, Superior, and Michigan to Chicago, where we had the boat stored starting October of last year. We just dropped it in last week, and now we're starting on our way home, heading out the St. Lawrence, back to Portland, Maine.
The Mudges and Hannah are in a unique position to testify to the beauties of this freshwater network.
We love cruising in the Great Lakes. The water is so nice, clear. You don't get all encrusted with salt. You got a variety of ports. Well, you get a mixture of world-class big cities, but you also get interesting little towns and everything in between.
In Waukegan Harbor, the Mudges have found one of the historically most polluted locales of the Great Lakes. It was in this harbor that the carcinogenic potential of polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs, was first publicized in the mid-1970s. It's in the harbor sediment here that PCBs remain in unacceptable concentrations.
If I do my math correctly, you were a junior at New Trier when they first discovered PCBs in Waukegan Harbor.
That's right. We suffered under the leadership of Outboard Marine Corporation and George Soros, who bankrupted the company and then left us with a smoking hole of a polluted harbor right in the middle of one of the key cities that Illinois enjoys along Lake Michigan.
The now-defunct Outboard Marine Corporation, or OMC, was located in Waukegan Harbor. In the course of manufacturing its engines, it dumped significant amounts of PCBs into the harbor, which collected as sediment. Billionaire George Soros failed in an OMC bailout attempt. Waukegan Harbor was left unsurpassed in terms of its pollution levels.
It was the worst PCB site in terms of contaminated sediments throughout the Great Lakes.
It was President Jimmy Carter who first suggested that polluting industries pay for the cleanup of their messes. The so-called Superfund legislation was passed in 1980, but it took another decade before the Superfund cleanup of Waukegan Harbor began.
Part of the cleanup action included converting this former boat slip into a PCB containment cell. So a double sheet pile wall was extended all the way around the former boat slip, and the water was then pumped out, and the contaminated sediment was then pumped into this piece.
The process took more than 2 years, with OMC bankrolling the project to the tune of $22 million.
The northern harbor portion of the site that was cleaned up extends to approximately at the end of where these cottonwood trees are, about where the boat slip number 1 is, that serves the industries.
But when the project was completed in 1993, PCBs and other pollutants remained here.
A lot of the real heavy contamination has been cleaned out, but there's still about 5% left, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're dealing with what's been called the worst PCB mess in the world, even 5% is still a lot of contamination.
Legislation passed in 2002, the so-called Great Lakes Legacy Act, seemed to promise Waukegan Harbor the full cleanup it needed, in the form of dredging, provided local governmental bodies, known as stakeholders in legislative jargon, pay for a small portion of the costs.
The Legacy Act requires a non-federal match fund to help do a cleanup project. 65% of the funds to clean up the harbor would come from the federal government and 35% from the local match from other stakeholders. The city was one of the local stakeholders.
And the residual PCBs of Waukegan Harbor seem to be the perfect target for Legacy Act funds.
This was a program, a federal program designed entirely to clean up Great Lakes harbors. And we were well positioned to then be the most massive cleanup for the Legacy Act.
The project that was proposed to us for Waukegan Harbor was to actually dredge about 250,000 cubic yards of contaminated sediments out of the harbor in order to reach our cleanup goals.
In the spring of 2006, it seemed as though Waukegan, Lake County, and the other local entities were all on the same page and willing to pony up their share.
We had bipartisan support. Everybody was around the table, and every unit that ever had been and should be at the table were there. And we spent one whole day hammering out, do we want to go forward?
The deal in this case was that the federal government, under the Legacy Act, would pay $25 million. And then the city would come up with $6 million. We thought that was a good deal because it would unlock 1,600 acres of lakefront property valued at over $800 million for the community. But at the last minute, local leaders decided that they didn't want to come up with the $6 million to get the $25 million, so the harbor is still polluted today.
Though the city of Waukegan won't talk about it now, aldermen here in May of 2007 passed a resolution calling on the federal government to limit the depth of the waterway in the harbor channel. The city fathers wanted, in essence, to put the harbor's industrial past behind them in favor of a recreational future. The deeper draft cargo ships that presently serve harbor industry would effectively be shut out of the harbor. And National Gypsum, which depends on shipments via water, would probably be out of business at this location. The federal EPA said no to Waukegan's scheme.
We couldn't go along with because it's actually Waukegan Harbor is a authorized federal navigation harbor, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers actually is authorized and has a responsibility for keeping that depth. So we would not have been able to get the required permits in order to implement that kind of remedy where we decrease the depth and the navigable use of the waterway.
The city of Waukegan has declined to discuss its new vision for a deindustrialized Waukegan Harbor, citing pending litigation. In an effort to finance its own shallow dredging of the harbor, Waukegan is now suing industries located there, claiming the prop watch from cargo ships is dispersing PCB sediment. Though the EPA has nixed a Waukegan Harbor dredging under the Legacy Act, it is still using Superfund money to clean up groundwater contamination, now by enlisting microbes to do the dirty work.
The water will be coming into this edge of the building. It's be coming in a series of pipes because we'll have 7 to 8 pumping wells at one time coming in from each part of the ground and pumping approximately 30 gallons per minute into the 180,000 gallon tank. And on the bottom of the tank will be some sludge that contains the bacteria that will eat up the ammonia and the phenol and the benzene that would be in the groundwater as contamination.
This, of course, is no substitute for removing Waukegan Harbor's PCBs.
Luckily, federal law says that even if a community doesn't want to remove a threat to human health and habitation, the federal government still will move in. And so it takes longer. The cleanup will be probably a decade long rather than the previous plan, which is it would have all been cleaned up in just 3 years.